G'day ladies and gents, and welcome to IL2 Sturmovik, the Battle of Stalingrad. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Battle of Moscow's early access aircraft. For those of you who are unaware of how the Battle of Moscow's early access is working, each month, starting last month, one of the new aircraft that will be available in the Battle of Moscow, that will form up the 10 core aircraft of the Battle of Moscow, will become available for players who pre-purchased the premium edition of the Battle of Moscow to play within Battle of Stalingrad's quick missions. Today we're taking a look at the I-16 Type 24. Now the first thing I noted about the I-16, and I absolutely love, is they got the gear retraction correct. Gear retraction in the I-16 is not handled by hydraulics. It's actually a small handle that you can see rotating there inside of the cockpit. The pilot actually has to crank this handle to retract the landing gear and reverse the crank in order to lower the landing gear while flying the aircraft. There we go. Landing gear is finally retracted, and there's the I-16 ready for combat. Now the I-16 is powered by an M63 supercharged air-cooled radial engine. This engine puts out 800 horsepower in standard operation and up to 1,100 horsepower under boost. It has a maximum altitude of 9.5 kilometers with an optimal altitude of 3 kilometers. Its rate of climb is 2,900 feet per minute at maximum. Its primary armaments are 4 7.62mm Shikers machine guns. However, it can have 2 of the wing-mounted Shikers machine guns removed and refit with 2 20mm Shevak cannons. In our first combat scenario today, 3 Junkers Ju-87 Stukas have made a pass on the runway. Myself and my wingman, both in I-16s, have been scrambled in order to intercept and destroy these Ju-87s. Now for this particular fight, the aircraft has been field modded. It has been armed with the 20mm cannons. Now this trades firepower for combat endurance. Why the 20mm cannons do offer substantially more firepower than the standard machine guns that are normally fitted into the wings, they have very limited amounts of ammunition, so trigger control is a must. I've also replaced the windshield for this particular fight. It replaces the standard box heavily braced frontal windshield that is standard on I-16s with a nice smooth half cone with very little bracing, increasing forward visibility. Now as I take the I-16 through its first stall turn, it looks like my wingman has eliminated the first of the Ju-87s. It's going down in flames. Looks like the pilot has already bailed out. Time to move on the second and third targets. Now in the Battle of Moscow, the I-16 is actually a very easy, very beautiful aircraft to fly. However, it has some quite violent handling characteristics. Up until you reach the maximum point in its turn, the plane will handle beautifully. It has a tight turning circle, it's very agile, it's very maneuverable, it's very easy to get on target. However, if you just pull the stick a little bit too much, the plane will immediately spin and try and point its nose at the ground. And this was a common issue in the I-16's design, and something that Soviet pilots did have to contend with when flying this aircraft. It's modelled very well in the Battle of Moscow, and you will see some examples of it in the upcoming battles. The large forward engine cowling covering the radial, as you can see, does make it hard producing these very fine shots, but when you get guns on target, there's the hit. Looks like I destroyed the rudder and I blew off one of the elevators, locking the elevators in control, and that's the second Ju-87 out of the fight. For those wondering why I'm trying to get so close to these aircraft, my gun convergence is set for 200 meters, so I like to be within 150 to 200 meters of the target before I pull the triggers. That's because of how the I-16 flies. It handles so well in close combat. I want to be able to fight where those guns are nice and close and be able to strike the targets at short range. Now the last Ju-87 is roughly 400 meters below me, just off my left wing near the nose cowling. You may be able to see it just there. I'm going to pass over the top of it, roll the plane over and dive back in from behind. Now as I said earlier on, the 20mm field modification does increase firepower. However, it does have a drastic effect on the amount of ammunition you have available and thus your endurance in combat. At this point my 20mm cannons are almost out of ammunition. I'm going to run out in this next engagement. So back to the handling of the I-16. The I-16 is an aircraft that you don't just have to watch how hard you're pulling on the stick to keep this plane in control. The I-16 itself is a very light aircraft with a very powerful radial mounted inside of it. As such, high-speed throttle movements can actually cause torque rolls that will also spin you out of control. You will see another example of this coming up as well. If you pull back on the throttles or increase the throttles too quickly in a turn, the increased torque on the engine will cause the I-16 to spin out of control. The heavy mass in the front of the aircraft due to the massive weight of the radial will almost always result in the I-16 pointing nose down out of these spins. And as you can see, the 20mm cannons are now dry. I'm now opening up completely with the 7.62s. That's all I've got left. Two 7.62s to take out this Stuka. Now, I've got so many hits across the airframe at this point, there's no way knowing this Stuka is making it home. It's just a matter of time before it actually goes down. Now, judging by the fact that I'm not taking fire from the Stuka's defensive gunners, I would say I have already killed the rear gunner in the aircraft. Just making a nice wide turn so I can bring the guns back around in order to finish him off if he doesn't go down, but it was just then that I spotted the parachute release. That's the last Stuka eliminated. German pilot bailing out over a Russian airfield, nothing bad can come from that. Now it looks like the Ju-87 is staying intact, so I'm actually going to follow it around and watch it crash. Now, as I was saying a moment ago, any of the spins or torque rolls that will result in loss of control of this aircraft will almost always result in the aircraft pointing nose down. This is actually very good for spin recovery and will allow you to get control of the aircraft again. The downside is that the I-16 performs best at low altitude, so you're probably not going to be particularly high when this happens. The I-16's elevator authority is also not particularly great in high angles of attack. As a result, it is very likely that if one of these torque rolls or spins does occur, you're going to have a lot of difficulty actually pulling out of the dive that it forces you into, and you're likely going to pancake. So, two fully upgraded I-16s versus three Ju-87s isn't a particularly fair fight, so how about two completely unupgraded I-16s versus two Bf-109 F4s? Now this fight is rather unfair, and it is something that probably won't be happening in the Battle of Moscow campaign. The German side will be getting two new aircraft for Battle of Moscow. They will be getting an E-Series 109 and an early F-Series. The F2, I believe, is going to be the aircraft that will be the highest level fighter the Germans have access to. So the F4s won't be joining that fight, at least not in campaign mode. However, those are currently unavailable for testing, so the F4 is the plane I'm going against here. Now the F4 does outperform the I-16 in pretty much all areas, however this fight did start at 500 metres, giving the I-16s at least some chance to engage safely. Pull a little bit too hard on the stick here and the plane immediately flips out of control, and I immediately have to go into recovery mode, manage to get the plane back out to level and pull out. And that's what I mean by putting just a little bit too much pressure on the stick, and the I-16 will just spin out of control. Thankfully I did apply enough firepower to the F4 before I went into that spin. It did lose control and just went into the ground. So there is now two I-16s versus one F4. The second F4 is again being engaged by my wingman, however he has taken the aircraft into altitude. At the moment they're up at about 2,500 metres and the fight is climbing in altitude. The higher the F4 goes, the bigger advantage it gets, the lower the chances are that we're going to be able to kill it. Now as my wingman's I-16 and the F4 are constantly climbing above the battlefield at the moment, I'm going to have to pull a wide spiral climb around the outside of the area they're fighting in to slowly get myself back to altitude with this F4. It's actually going to take some time as I'm trying to catch two aircraft that are climbing, and the F4 in particular is an incredibly fast climbing aircraft. As you can see, they're just going head to head. I'm moving in the same direction as my wingman. The F4 will now be behind me. It's not going to dive in, it will continue climbing away. I'm going to head into the cloud bank to my left and begin another left-hand spiral up to altitude. So as we continue to climb our way up to this F4 and we head through the extremely beautifully rendered cloud effects, let's take a look at the instrumentation on the I-16. Now all the gauges on the I-16 are fully working and they are beautifully rendered, incredibly easy to read, but the aircraft itself does suffer the same problem that the real-life I-16 did. Due to the design of the cockpit and the way the cowling progresses into the cockpit, the pilot actually has to dip his head in order to be able to see the gauges and the dashboard for the aircraft. To get around this, I've bound a key to look directly at the dashboard. Releasing the key will automatically return my vision to normal. So I've cut out about 2 minutes of climbing here. We've pulled in together at about 8,000 feet. Myself and my wingman are both on the tail of the F4. The F4 has taken damage from both of us. And here we encounter what is probably the best example of the I-16's biggest problem in stock format. While the 7.62mm machine guns do have massive amounts of ammunition, allowing you to sustain fire for an incredibly long period of time, it's death by 1,000 pinpricks. The 7.62mm rounds simply don't have the stopping force to do severe damage to any aircraft. You just need to continually apply damage to them until something within the aircraft fails. The 7.62s do also have a tendency to spray a lot, which is part of the reason I'm still running a 200 meters convergence on these guns. Keeping them at a fairly short range limits the amount of spray and keeps the guns very much in line. Now the F4's gone into a stall. I originally thought this may have been out for him, but he recovers. My wingman is moving in to engage and I roll over to initiate my own dive. However, the F4 pulls up sharply. It looks like we're going to cross over. Now in excess of about 400 kilometers an hour out of that dive, and I'm full back on the stick in order to try and pull this aircraft out and go back into the vertical in order to get back to the flight. Thankfully I didn't lose too much altitude in that. Roll out of the vertical, my wingman breaks off to the right, the F4 is straight ahead. I'm not entirely sure where my wingman goes at this point, I lose track of him. Now I keep my eyes mainly on the F4 here, I'm not looking around outside of the cockpit too much. That is mainly because this particular fight is set up for a 2-on-2 combat, and this is the last enemy aircraft. I have no need to look around looking for extra targets. Now despite the 200 meters gun convergence, I have ammo to spare, so I try a couple of long range sprays to see if I can get a couple of clips on him. The F4 starts pulling for altitude. Unfortunately for him, his damage is slowing him down. That allows me to close the gap. Just trying to get into position. Pull back on the stick too hard, and there we go, another snap roll. Level it out. He's just off my left. Thankfully, I didn't overshoot him and put myself in his guns. Bank back in on target. Thankfully, locating his aircraft at this point is very easy. The damage he sustained and the giant black streak he's leaving through the sky makes tracking his target and position very, very simple. Once again, he looks like he's pulling for more altitude. This is again going to slow him up and give me another chance to get guns on target. Now I have a moment here where I thought I heard my wingman coming up behind me. I thought I'd better check his location so we don't collide mid-air engaging the F4. He wasn't there. Good hits on the left wing. Pull back on the throttle gently. More hits running parallel to him. Try and cut back underneath his position at the moment. And it looks like he's going into a shallow dive. Now this is both a blessing and a curse. The blessing is he's going to be dropping a lot of altitude. At the moment we're in excess of 9,000 meters, so we're above the optimal altitude for the I-16. Its handling at the moment is not great. It's taking a lot of very fine movements in order to keep him under control. The downside is if he doesn't turn, even with the damage he sustained, there is no way known I'll actually be able to catch his aircraft. Thankfully he does turn, and sharply. This kills a massive amount of his speed. And we've also dropped about 1,000 meters in that dive, so that just put us back into my optimal performance area. So the aircraft has just become nicer to handle again. Now controlling the throttle here, just want to get a nice smooth pass across the tail. Pulling the trigger early and drawing a line directly up across the tail. Holding the wings doesn't seem to be doing a huge amount to his aircraft, so trying to put shots into the elevator now to actually disable his ability to pull out of those dives. Loop the I-16 back around for its final pass, moving in for a kill shot on him. And I notice he's got a lot of rudder walk at the moment. I think that last pass actually did severe damage to the rudder. I actually couldn't get the guns on target there. I couldn't bring the nose down fast enough without risking a collision. And then as I check my six as I pass out to see what he's doing, I see the parachute deploy. The pilot's bailed out. The F4 has been eliminated. As I said earlier in this video, death by 1,000 pinpricks. The aircraft didn't actually disassemble until it hit the ground. I just put so many holes in it that its internal components started failing, the aircraft lost control and the pilot was forced to bail out. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the I-16 for IL2 Stromovik, the Battle of Moscow. It is a great and fun little aircraft to fly, and one of the 10 aircraft that will be released over the coming months for people who have pre-ordered the Battle of Moscow and who own Battle of Stalingrad to actually be able to test. I'm actually a month behind on this one, so while the I-16 is out now for me to take a look at, the MC202 is also available, and it will be the next plane that I take out for a spin. Until next time, ladies and gents, click like if you do, subscribe if you want to see more, fly smart, fly safe, and I'll catch you in the skies.